Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to show you a simple system for choosing a party when you have a game where you can have up to a certain number of characters, and those characters must be members of a single class, or you've got different sort of types of characters, and you can choose any number. You can choose freely from among those types, but you have a limit on sort of how many you can choose, which is the case in a lot of fantasy themed games, of course. So we have a screen here, and it says click on a small picture to add a member to your party. We have 4 small pictures here representing the 4 different classes. If we hover over them, we should see some hover text. Yep, there we go. Wizard, thief, barbarian, knight. And let's say we want a barbarian. Okay, we'll click. And then the party roster here now has a picture of the barbarian, a larger version of that picture of the barbarian, and then the word barbarian, and then it's got 4 empty slots. So we could say, all right, I want a barbarian, a couple of knights, and a couple of thieves, let's say. You can see that now that it's full, all it says is click on a large picture to remove a party member. We still have the pictures, but clicking on them doesn't do anything because now we're full. But let's say we say, well, that's not right. I actually want a wizard, so I'll get rid of one of the thieves. So we click on the thief, and now the text changes to indicate that we can add pictures by clicking on the small pictures. And once we're satisfied, let's say we say, all right, actually just have one of every class. I'll get rid of that. I'll just have four, and I'll leave one of the slots open. And then we press, when we're satisfied, we press continue, and off we go, having chosen our party. So that's what it looks like. Let's have a look at the code. So, as always, I've called the first page initialize, where we set up all of the variables that we're going to need. There aren't all that many. We have an array A, which is the current state of the party. It's going to start with every slot of that array set to 0, which means it's an empty slot. But then if it has a number in it, that means it has a member of a particular class in it. We have H, which is the current number of party members, which of course starts at 0. We have P, which is the maximum, we have P, which is the maximum number of party members. We have C, which is how many different classes there are. And then we have N, which is an array which gives the names of the different classes. So in this case, knight, barbarian, thief, and wizard. And as always, we've got the 0th one filled in with null because I find it easier to start from 1. And I've got a note to myself that says that $Z and $Y are temporary variables. Then we have a for loop, which goes from 1 to P. So from 1 to the maximum number of party members. And it sets every slot of the A array from 1 to P, so in this case from 1 to 5, to 0. And having done all that, we go to choose, which is the main screen of the program. So most of it is a series of tables. HTML tables kind of spread out the code. They make the code quite long, but the code is not as complicated as you would think just from looking at its length. So everything's contained within a div align equals center, or less than div space align equals quote center quote greater than. And then at the end of the code, we're going to have less than /div greater than to indicate the end of the div. A div is just a paragraph, basically. We start with a text message. If H is less than P, that means there are spare slots, or a spare slot or slots in the party. Click on a small picture to add a member to your party. H is the current number of party members and P is the maximum. So if there's less than maximum, then it says click on a small picture to add a member to your party. And if H is greater than 0, if there are any members in the party, it says click on a large picture to remove a party member. And those are going to be on the same line because we haven't put any line breaks or anything. And because, as always, when we got in here, the first two things we did, we went to story and details and moved it from, I think it starts as Harlow, and we moved it to Sugarcube. And secondly, we went to JavaScript and we put this config.passages.nobr equals true, which means set it up so that having a line break in the code doesn't mean have a line break on the screen, because doing that allows you to spread out your code so it's nice and easy to read without creating all these line breaks that you didn't mean to create. But it does have the downside that if you want a line break, you've got to specify that. You've got to put, usually we put less than BR greater than, like that. So without that, it means that these two lines, these two bits of text, if they both print, if H is greater than 0 and less than P, they will both print on the same line, but the program automatically puts a space in between them, so we don't need to specify that there should be a space. All right, so we've created the text, and then we have a series of tables. The first table, which runs from basically there to there, is pictures of all of the classes, and each of those pictures is going to have hover text, which is the name of the class. So we can move the mouse over it and see what it is, and it's also going to be a link so that we can click on it and make things happen, or at least it's going to be a link if there's a spare slot in the party. So we have a for loop. It goes from 1 to C. C is the number of classes. Sorry, we specify that there's a table, and then we specify that we want to start a table row. This particular table is only going to have one TR in it. So all of the code is just going to end with a /tr and a /table. So having done that tr, we have a for loop that goes from 1 to C. We set up a TD, which is a cell. Down here we're going to have /td and a /4, but within that we're going to assign a value to the temporary variable y, and we're going to then print it. This is one of those things where if we tried to print the code as we go, it wouldn't handle it properly, so we have to print it all in one go, and then it knows what to do with it. So we start with this line of code, and it's a bit complicated, so I'll type out an example of what we get. We're going to assign a value to $y, and the value is going to be text, which is, we know because of this quote mark at the beginning here. So it's going to be square bracket, img, square bracket, plus nz. NZ is going to be, N is the array that has the name of the classes, so it might be something like thief. Plus, then we have this divider, and then we have art/s. Then we have $z, so it might be something like 3.png, end square bracket. And then what happens depends on whether H is less than P. If H is less than P, in other words, if the number of characters currently in the party is less than the maximum, then we add this. square bracket, ADD, end square bracket, $Z to whatever Z is, so let's say 3, semicolon, Y to 0. So if H is less than P, we'll have something like that. If H is not less than P, and H can only then be equal to P because H can never go over P, the first bit will be the same, but then the second bit won't be there. It'll just be an end square bracket. And then whichever of those two we've got, we then print, and then we end the cell, and then we have the end of the for loop, the end of the row, the end of the table. So let's talk about what these mean. Well, this one, I'll talk about this one first because it's sort of the more basic version. It's just an image command. And it's when you've got this, when within the first set of, you've got a square bracket, IMG, another square bracket, and then when within that you have to have the location and name of the file. So art, A-R-T, slash s3.png. I keep all my pictures in a folder called art. And when you have this divider, this vertical divider, the bit on the right is the location and name, and the bit on the left is the hover text. You don't have to have hover text. You could just have the art slash s3. You could do it like that and just have art slash s3.png. But in this case, we want hover text because we want the player to know to be able to look at the picture and go, oh yeah, that's a wizard or that's a thief or whatever it may be. So that's just the picture plus hover text. What we've got up here is a more complicated version. It still has the picture, still has the hover text, but it's now got two more sets of square brackets. The first set of square brackets has the page. It turns it into a link, and it says if this picture is clicked, then go to whatever page is named within this square bracket, in this case, add. And when you go to add, the second set of square brackets, which is optional, tells you what to do with variables. So it's saying go to add, and set Z to 3 and Y to 0. And Z is the number of the class that the player has chosen, and Y is always 0. And we'll see what that why it's that when we look at add, which we might do immediately. Actually, might make more sense to do that. So if there's a spare slot, make the picture a link to add a member of that of whichever class we're currently dealing with. And if there isn't a spare slot, just still print all the pictures and still have the hover text, but don't make them links, because if the player wants to add something, they're going to have to get rid of something first. So that's the first table. That's the table where we print the small pictures, which are to add to the party. Then we have a table down here, which is the large pictures, which is what's already in the party. But before we deal with that, I think it's probably more logical to look at add. So we've sent the player, or the player has chosen to go to add, and we've set Z to whatever the number of the class is, and we've set Y to 0. So let's see what happens in add. So this is just a note. Y is going to be the slot where we put the new character, and Z is going to be the class that we've chosen. So what we do is we set Y++, in other words, we add 1 to Y, and then we ask, is $A square bracket $Y end square bracket, is that greater than 0? And if it's greater than 0, then that means that slot of the party is already occupied. And if that's the case, then we just include add, which means we include the page we want. We go essentially to the top of the page again. And there we'll add 1 to Y again. We'll try the next slot. And if that's full, we'll try the next slot. And we only get to go to the add page if there is a spare slot somewhere. So we're never going to get an error. So what we're doing here essentially is we're increasing Y until we get an empty slot. So eventually we will get an empty slot. And so this code will execute. we set $A square bracket $Y n square bracket equal to Z. So we say, all right, slot 3 of the party is the first one that's empty. We're going to set that to what you've chosen, which is class number 2 or whatever it may be. We set H++ because H is the number of characters in the party. So we increase that. And then we include choose. In other words, we go back to this page, which is the main page. So that's the system for adding a party member, but we also need a system for getting rid of ones if we change our mind. So we have another table. This is a little bit more complicated because it has 2 rows. And it has 2 rows because I've got large pictures of the characters, and I've also got a picture which is a sort of fancy text with the name of the class. So that's why it said barbarian and thief and stuff under there. I had to do them as pictures because the way Twine works, it's quite difficult to include a font file, which is the file for a typeface, and have that execute. I haven't been able to work out how to do that, so I just had to make pictures of the names in that fancy font and print them that way. If you're interested in the typeface, by the way, it's called Folkard. It's Folkard. It should be free to download, and it's sort of one of the 2 fonts that I generally use for kind of for D&D style fantasy, I guess. Anyway, so let's have a look at this table. So we've got 2 rows. We've got TR and then a bunch of code. Sorry, I'm in the wrong place. Sorry, that's the first table. Okay, second table, we've got 2 rows. We've got TR, got a bunch of code, /TR, and then TR, /TR, and then /table. So let's look at the first row. The first row is a for loop going from 1 to P. P, remember, is the maximum number of party members. So it goes through every slot in the party. And in each of them, it makes a TD, a cell, which is aligned towards the center. This one isn't particularly necessary. The other row has a line center, a line equals center. That is necessary because the pictures are all different. The pictures of the names of the classes are all different widths, because of course the word barbarian is wider than the word thief, and the word wizard is a different width again. But the pictures are all the same. So this TD doesn't actually have to be aligned to be centered. It could just be a normal TD like that. But anyway, we have a TD, and we have a couple of possibilities. If $A, $Z is over 0, we have this quite complicated bit of code, which I'll go through. If else, and the only other option is that AZ will be equal to 0, because none of the slots in this array can ever be less than 0. They're always either 0 or a number from 1 to C, where C is the number of classes. So otherwise, we just print this image, which is art/e.png, and that's that empty square. So I just made a little sort of empty square picture. And at the start, of course, you'll get 5 of those, and then they'll gradually fill up. But let's look at this more complicated bit of code. So it's printing this quite long bit of code, and I'll go through an example of what it might look like. We have square bracket, img, square bracket, art/c, and then it says plus $A, $Z. So if the slot that we're talking about is class number 2, the barbarian, I think that's class number 2, then it'll say c2.png. Then it has an n square bracket, then it has another square bracket, and it goes to choose n square bracket. So that tells you that it's a link. All of the characters in the party are always going to be links, because you can always choose to get rid of them. And then finally, we have yet another square bracket, and that is $A square bracket let's say 3, whatever the slot is. So this value is Z, and this value is $A, $Z. So these two are not necessarily going to be the same. This one is based on what class is in this slot, and then this is what slot are we talking about. So A3, for example, to 0, H minus minus, N square bracket, N square bracket. So what does that mean? Well, that's a more complicated image command. It is an image. The first square bracket tells you, or set of square brackets, what's within the first set of square brackets, tells you what picture to pick. And this time we've got C2, so we've got up the top, we had S, S1, S2, etc., which of course stands for small. And then up here we've got C, C1, C2, etc., which are exactly the same pictures but twice as big. The next set of square brackets tells you where it, or makes it a link and tells you where it's a link to, and it's a link to choose. In other words, it's a link to this page. It takes you back to this page, but before going to this page, the third set of square brackets tells you to change some variables. It tells you to set this particular slot of the party to 0 and reduce H by 1. $H minus minus. Minus minus means set it to its current value minus 1. So it's the opposite of plus plus, which means add 1. So in other words, this is just saying this slot of the party, now make that an empty slot and reduce the number of characters in the party by 1, because of course we've got rid of 1. And that is the system for displaying and getting rid of characters. And then, of course, we end the TD, we end the for, we end the TR. Now we have another row, which is again a loop from 1 to P. Again, we set a TD and align it to the center. This is just printing the names of the classes for those slots that are filled. So and that's the code that does it. And I'll type out an example of what that might do. So we go a square bracket img art/t. So we have T1, T2, T3, and T4, and they're the names of the classes. And then we have C1, C2, C3, and C4, and they are the big pictures of that class. And then we have S1, S2, S3, and S4, and they are the small pictures of that class. And of course, they all have to be matched. I made sure that the C4 is the big picture of the wizard, and T4 is the word wizard. Okay, so let's say T image art/T, and then whatever $A, $Z is, so whatever class this is, so T4, and then plus PNG. So it will print if the slot that we're talking about is occupied, it will print the name of the relevant class. And then the only other, now of course I could have had a single picture. I could have combined the C pictures and the titles. I could have had a single graphic, which was a picture of a barbarian and then the word barbarian, as long as I made them all, the same size, etc. But I didn't think of it, so I've just got it in a two-dimensional, or we've got them as separate things. And also, there might be particular cases where you just want to print the picture. Maybe you would have the, maybe you want to have the character's name underneath from now on instead of the name of the class. But anyway, for good or ill, I have done them as two separate things, but of course that's not necessary. And then the only other thing is a button. If H is over 0, in other words, if you've chosen any character, or if you've chosen a character or more than one character to be in the party, you don't have to sort of fill up the party. Then have a button that allows the player to finish and keep going. And as always, we have less than button, and then the first bit is the text that is printed. It doesn't need quotes around it because there's no spaces in the text. And the next bit is the page that it goes to, and again, that doesn't need quotes around it because it's a single block of text with no spaces. But if, for example, next stage was written as two separate words, then we'd need to put quotes around it. You can still put quotes around it. I could have done this, and that would have been fine, but there's no need to. And then we immediately have the slash button. If we wanted to, we could have put some code in here, but I, in this case, don't want to. So this is just a button to continue. And next stage doesn't have anything in it. It's just a this is where the text, this is where the code would be if this were a full game. So that is a system for choosing a party. If you have classes or sort of character types, and you can choose freely between them, up to a sort of set party limit. I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.